Hi, welcome to Finhaven Castle Water on the South Esk. It's early July, and today I want to talk a little bit about something quite seasonal, which, as you probably guessed from the title of the video, is going to be sea trout. So what I'm going to do is do probably a two-part little mini series on sea trout fishing and how we go about it. And the reason that I'm doing that is because we get a lot of anglers on the South Esk who are interested in coming to fish for sea trout. It's one of the things that the South Esk has traditionally been known and famous for, and it can still be very good. It's not as good, obviously, as is common with most places, as it once was. However, given the right conditions, on the right night, sea trout fishing can be exceedingly good on the South Esk, and we still have some very, very good sport here. So it's something that people will travel to the river specifically to do and to try. Now, you may have noticed that I just said night, on the right night. Traditionally, sea trout fishing at this time of year, when you expect low, clear water, is done at night time. And we'll talk about the reasons for that probably in the next segment of the video. Today, I want to focus purely on starting right at the beginning and getting set up, because it doesn't need to be complicated, but it's very important that you are confident in being set up correctly, and therefore everything further down the line from that will kind of naturally come a bit easier. You might be watching this as a more experienced angler, and you might completely disagree with some of the things that I'm going to say as we go through this video, and that's absolutely fine. I don't mind that at all. However, please bear in mind that I'm really making this video to start right at the beginning for perhaps someone that hasn't done this before, someone that wants to give it a shot and is feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit out of their depth. They're not very confident. I see it a lot, and obviously if people are coming here to fish, I'll do everything I can to make sure that they are feeling confident about where they're starting from and gives them as much help as possible. But in terms of the wider ether, for example, you know, just put a little video together, and if people want to watch that before they come, that can't do any harm either. So if you are watching this and don't disagree with what I'm saying, please bear in mind that there's many more than one ways to skin a cat. I'm not going to try and suggest that the way I'm doing things is the only way to do it, or the way that it must be done, otherwise it won't work. That's not true. This is just going to focus on the basics. And for any new anglers that are watching this, confidence is key to fishing in general, particularly at night time when you can't see very well, you're doing everything by feel. It's quite daunting if you haven't done it before. So the more confidently you can approach that, the more likely you are to be successful and want to come and do it again. And night fishing can be absolutely fantastic. It's really exciting if you get the right night and you get it right. So yeah, just take this for what it is, and if you are new to it, you can leave this feeling confident that if you do and set up, as I'm going to demonstrate in this video, you will be set up with something that will catch fish, and that's really important in terms of confidence. So onto the kit. I have very basic selection of kit here. I'm just going to show you how to set up one basic setup today. I'm not going to go into different line densities and things. We'll come across that. We'll cover that later if necessary. So for today, I have 10-foot 7-weight fly rod. Now for me, 10-foot 7-weight is the rod for sea trout fishing at night in a small to medium-sized river. I'm not saying that you couldn't get away with fishing other rods slightly shorter or slightly longer. However, I strongly feel that 10-foot 7-weight is the rod. And again, in a second segment of the video, when we come to actually approaching the video and fishing, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But 10-foot 7-weight is a really, really good starting point for a sea trout rod. That's paired with, this is a full floating line that's on that. I'm going to show you how I'm going to set this up as we go through the video. The 7-weight floating line, small selection of flies. I have a big wooden box that size, double-sided wooden box, absolutely jammed with salmon and sea trout flies. I tie them all the time. you don't want to be carrying a big box of empty at night. You don't need to. Just put a few, and that's more than I would carry at night. Anyway, I would literally carry half a dozen, if that, at night on me. But just for demonstrative purposes, that's a small selection there. And again, we'll talk about them in a bit more detail shortly. And you've got some cast material, some leader material here, and down the front here as well. And we'll cover them as we go through. So the first thing we need to do is get our fly rod threaded up. So I'm going to move these flies away from here just now and get this rod set up. Now, whatever rod you're using is entirely up to you. It doesn't matter. The only thing that's important is that you like it and you fish confidently and accurately with it. This one is an old Hardy ultralight, which I bought years ago, and I had the handle customized on it, and it's been with me ever since. I won't ever get rid of it. And it is paired with a Young's Jubilee reel, which is a beautiful reel. So there's our floating line threaded through our rod rings, and here we have the end of the line here. There's nothing wrong with fishing a full floating line. Again, traditionally, that's all people really had, was either a sinking line or a greased line. As I say, fish a full floating line by all means, that's fine. I prefer to have a small intermediate tip on my floating line setup, and that goes for me fishing for salmon during the day as well. I very rarely fish a full floating line. I usually have an intermediate tip on. That's just my personal preference. You don't have to do that. The reason that I like to do that is, well, two reasons. One is that I just always feel that breaking the surface tension, breaking the surface film, and just letting your flies dig in ever so slightly. This is only a 5-foot polytip, intermediate polytip, trout polytip. It's not going to get down very far, particularly when you take into consideration the kind of water pressure coming downstream and keeping it up. It's not going to get down far at all, but it is going to break the surface tension, and I always like that. The other reason that I like it is because it's heavily tapered. You've got this thick butt section here, which tapers down to probably a 7-pound breaking strain tip on there. And what that does is it helps roll your cast out nicely. It helps keep your cast nice and straight as it rolls the flies out, keeps everything in a line. And that's really useful at night as well, just having that extra insurance and knowing that your stuff's being delivered where you want it to and in the manner that you want it to. So I really like a polytip at night, an intermediate polytip. If I was fishing a full floating line, I would be fishing with a tapered cast. Again, for the same reason, it will just help, that tapering will help unroll everything nicely and get everything to where you want it to be. So that's just, I think it's probably a 9-foot trout tapered cast, which probably goes down to, again, about a 7-pound breaking strain, I would think, and you can tie your droppers onto the end of that if you want to fish a dropper. So I'm going to put my polytip on here, just a loop-to-loop connection at the butt end, and then put the tip end through the loop of the fly line, the end of the fly line, and there's your loop-to-loop connection. That's never coming out. The butt end comes pre-fitted with a loop that's factory made. The tip end doesn't come looped at all. Now there's various options of doing that. You can either tie a little perfection loop or what have you. I prefer to use, you probably won't see this on the camera, I'll see if I can bring it a bit closer. I prefer to use these things, if you can see that, these little stainless steel tippet rings. I use them for trout and salmon all the time. They're especially good for reservoir fishing, for nymphing and fishing buzzers and things like that. But they're a great invention. I use them all the time, and that's just a half blood knot between the end of the poly tip and the tippet ring itself, and that just stays on there. That never comes off. Now, on to cast material, or leader material as we would now call it. I like fluorocarbon. It's fairly stiff, which is a great thing at night time. That helps to reduce any tangles that you're going to get, and it doesn't matter how experienced or good you are at casting and fishing, sooner or later at night time you're going to get tangled up, and whether that's because you make a mistake with your casting, or you hit a tree, or even when you're playing a fish, sometimes sea trout will dive and dart all over the place when you're playing them. They fight really hard, and it's not uncommon to net a fish and then find out that you've got a great big tangle in your cast. Now, fluorocarbon will help to avoid that on account of its stiffness. It will help to mitigate that to some extent. The other reason I like it is because it cuts the surface tension of the water quite well. Copolymer will tend to float a little bit more than fluorocarbon, and that'll just dig in a little bit further and make everything fish nicely. So breaking strain wise, I would go somewhere between 7 and 10 pounds on average. You might be watching this from Wales, where you fish the Typhy or the Towie, and think, well, that's a bit light. We get big sea trout down here. On the South Esk, we tend not to get massive sea trout. We have a very good average stamp of fish. They'll tend to be somewhere between £1.75 and £2.5. If you have a good night and you're getting half a dozen to yourself, you would probably expect a 4-pounder in there somewhere, and sometimes one bigger. But they're a good average stamp here, and they hit very, very hard often. So nice and strong. I'd say somewhere between 7 and 10 pounds. If the water's very low and clear, you might want to go a little bit lower. If it's got a tinge to it and if you can get away with it, you might want to go up a bit, so that you don't have to watch me making a cast up from scratch. So this, I think, is actually an 8-pound fluorocarbon cast with one dropper on it. Now, a dropper at night, you don't have to fish a dropper. I like a dropper, but if you're coming at this as a new angler, I would probably advise that you actually don't fish a dropper at night. One fly to get started with is more than enough to be working with at night. So you would have your tapered cast or your poly tip there, and then come down and just a good arm span or a little bit more than that, down to a single point fly, and that would be fine. But I've got this set up with a dropper, so I'm just going to half blood the butt end of my cast to that tippet ring. 6 turn half blood. And lubricate that. Some people say you don't need to lubricate fluorocarbon, or they used to say. I don't know if that's still the thing or not, but I always do. And make sure that it's really snugged down and tightened, and always make sure that you clip those tag ends off nice and neat. You do not want a big Irish pennant hanging off of your cast at any point, whether it's on the fly or any other connecting join. You always want to make sure they're clipped nice and neat. So between that tippet ring, the end of the intermediate poly tip, and my dropper, I've got probably about a foot and a half there, and that's coming down to a dropper of about 5 or 6 inches in length. I like a fairly long dropper because that gives you room to change if need be. What you don't want is to have, as I see this quite often, people tie a dropper and it'll be that length, and it's getting tangled up in the end of the cast and all that, so it's no use at all. So 5 or 6 inches is plenty long enough. From that dropper, I'm going to come down a real good arm span. It's probably 5 feet there between the dropper and the point fly. You don't want your dropper and your point fly right next to each other like that. You want to have nice, long, neat cast. So that's about 5 feet between dropper and point there. Now, as to flies, you've got plenty of options. Sea trout at night, it's debatable whether they're even going to be seeing colour. So you look at this little pouch of flies here, and you'll see an awful lot of black in there. And black's as good as anything for sea trout at night. I tie all my own flies, so I tend to just make stuff up as I go along. I don't often tie things to any particular pattern. If you're buying flies from a shop, maybe you're starting out and you're thinking, I'll buy a few flies to start fishing for sea trout at night. If you're in that position, you won't go wrong with silver stoats tails, silver butchers, things like that. Invictas, Cape McLarens, bog standard black pennels. You won't go wrong with anything like that. They'll all catch fish, all catch sea trout at night. They're probably only seeing a silhouette anyway, so all the different colours that you do see in here, you see I've got some orange and yellow and red and all the rest of it, that may well be completely redundant. It may well be that they're just seeing a silhouette and nothing more than that. That said, There are colours that I particularly like fishing at night because they give me confidence. I know they work well, and therefore I fish them confidently. One of those things would be orange and black. So I'm going to pick out an orange and black fly out here, and I'll hold it up, and hopefully you'll be able to see it on the camera there. So it's just a hare wing, squirrel tail wing, black wing with a gold body, an orange hackle, and 2 or 3 strands of flash in the top. That's going to be my point fly, and that's probably a size 10, that one. Most of the flies in here are between size 8 and 10. I'll talk a bit more about fly size in a minute. So I'm going to use that as my point fly, and what do I fancy as my dropper? It's not going to matter what I choose. I'll probably just go for this, and that is, if you could call it anything, probably just a Stoat's tail variant there. So that's a yellow tail, black wing, black hackle, and in this one that has a metallic green body, which looks nice to me, but sea trout aren't going to see that during the night, I wouldn't have thought. So we'll put them on, and then we'll talk a little bit about flies in a bit more detail. So I'm going to put the orange and black on the point here. Again, for me, that's just a 6-turn half blood knot. You don't need anything more than that, but you can tie your flies on whatever way you like, doesn't matter. Moistened, snugged down, and very importantly, in my opinion, trimmed nice and neat. No tag ends for me. So then we'll come up and we'll put our dropper on, which is that little kind of Stoat's tail variant type of thing. And trimmed off nice and neat as well. So we'll leave them aside for a moment. So I should probably talk a little bit about fly size, because that's something that people really get inside their own head about, I think, and often think, in my opinion, often think far too deeply about. Particularly with sea trout, I don't think you need to be too fussy. The flies in here, by and large, between these guys up here, these bigger doubles here, size 8s, and size 10s down here, there's some size 8 singles here, and there's even a couple of bigger tubes here. They're probably, 1.5 inches, 2 inches long. So I know from personal experience, I'm confident that sea trout will take any of those flies if they're in a taking mood. I don't feel the need to go much smaller than that. Some people will disagree with that. I know some people fish with very, very tiny flies for sea trout at night, and they catch fish too. I personally am not a huge fan of fishing size 14s and 16s in any situation, but that's just the way I fish. I don't feel the need to do that. I catch plenty of fish without going that small. Particularly with sea trout, I find if you go with very, very small hooks, sea trout are infamous for being, as they say, soft mouthed. They get off quite easily, and very, very small hooks, you will lose your more than your share of fish on very small hooks, I've always found. So I prefer to give them something to get hold of, and anything between a size 8 and a size 10 or a size 12 is more than adequate. And they'll take size 10s and 12s on the same night as they'll take tubes that size. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. I would just pick something, if you're new to this and you're worrying about what fly to put on, what size, anywhere between a size 8 and a size 10 or a size 12, you're not going to go wrong with that. Pick something and fish it with confidence. I think that's far more important than worrying about, have I got the right size of fly on, maybe I need to change. Anything in that kind of range will do fine. So there is our setup. We'll have I'll give you a quick run through it once again. So we've got our 10-foot 7-weight floating 10-foot 7-weight fly rod, floating line, which goes down to an intermediate poly tip there, 5-foot intermediate poly tip. That poly tip runs down to a tippet ring, On the other side, the downstream side of that tippet ring, I have my leader material, and I have about a foot and a bit between the tippet ring and my dropper of around about 5-6 inches in length. That'll stand out nicely from the cast without being so long that it's going to get tangled up and interfere with other things. And then a good arm span, probably a good 5 feet between the dropper and the point fly. And that's going to ensure that those flies are fishing at very slightly different depths. They're not going to be crowding each other, and it'll unroll nicely, and it'll fish a lot neater. So there is our basic setup. I'm going to wind that up just now. And what we'll do is we'll have a look in the next segment of the video at how we're going to approach the river. That's a very basic setup. There are other setups you could use, and there are other setups that I will use, and we may cover them, or we may not. We'll see how we go. If you're new to this and you set up with something akin to that, you will not be going far wrong if you can then deliver it accurately and fish it effectively and properly, and that's what we'll cover in the next video. So I hope that's been helpful, and I hope you'll join me in the next video for some kind of practical tips on how to approach the water and the fishing. Thanks for watching.